Today we're going to talk about the quadratic equation. So a quadratic equation is written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay? So in the quadratic equation, when you see this squared variable here, it tells you you're dealing with a quadratic. Recently, we've been dealing with linear equations. So linear equations, we don't have the variable squared. So think about our y equals mx plus b, right? Here, we have a variable, but it's not squared. So if we have y equals 2x plus 3, realize that this x is not squared, and in this case, it's going to make a straight line. So quadratic is a formula where we're not dealing with a straight line. Instead of dealing with a straight line, we're dealing with a shape that looks like this. This is called a parabola. And sometimes the parabola goes through the y-axis, as it does here. Sometimes it doesn't. But when we use the quadratic equation, what we're doing is we're looking for where the parabola, this shape, goes through the x-axis. So you see here we have two different points at which the parabola goes through the x-axis. Those are the points that we're going to be finding by using the quadratic equation. Now, as you take further math classes, you will learn other ways to describe these graphs, these parabolas. You will also learn other ways besides the formula to find the x-intercepts. However, today we're just going to be working with the quadratic formula. So remember just a minute ago, I gave you the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay? So what we're going to be doing is with the quadratic, we're going to be looking at what some values for the a, b, and c are in here. And when we do this, we set it equal to 0. Okay? We can solve for x if it's equal to 0. So let me give you an example. We might have 2x squared plus x minus 4 equals 0. As I look at this, in this case, I know my a value is 2. My b value is going to be what? It's going to be that invisible 1 that we sometimes have hidden in algebra. So b is going to be 1. It's my a, my b, and my c is going to be -4. So you notice I keep the negative with the 4, just like here my 1 is positive, and since there's no sign in front of the 2 is also positive. Okay, so that's the first thing that we need to look at. The next thing we're going to be doing is placing these a, b, and c values into the quadratic formula. So I'm going to write that here for you. Is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay. So once you have your equation set up with your a, b, and c like this, it's just a matter of plugging your values into here and solving. What will happen is you'll end up with 2 values for x, and those 2 values of x, again, are where your parabola is going to cross your x-axis, if you remember from the picture a minute ago. Okay? So let's go ahead and solve this. So my a value is 2. A equals 2. B equals 1. And c equals -4. So as I plug these values in, the opposite of b means it's not going to be positive 1, but it's going to be negative 1. So I'm going to have negative 1 plus or minus the square root, and now I just have regular b. So I'm going to have 1 squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Hopefully you're understanding so far, but this is just substitution. We learned about substitution earlier when we started with algebra in the first place. Okay, I'm going to move to my next board here, continuing with this problem. So I'm going to keep this one in mind as I move to a cleaner board. So my next step here is still going to be my negative 1, and I'm still going to have plus or minus. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify what was underneath the square root. So this is what was just underneath the square root. And then this was underneath it, 2 times a. Okay, so I'm going to work on simplifying this. So if I look what's under my square root first, 1 squared is 1, so I'm going to leave that the same. Now the reason I start under the square root is that's kind of like a grouping symbol, okay? So we can see that as this grouping symbol. So underneath the square root, we now have 1, because 1 times 1 is 1. And we have minus, and if we multiply these numbers together, 4 times 2 times 4, well, 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 4, or 8 times negative 4, is negative 32. Okay. So you can either count this negative right away. You can say negative 4 times 2 times negative 4, or you can just say minus and do 4 times 2 times negative 4. Either way, you're going to, after you do your keep, change, change with your subtraction here, keep, change, change, you're going to end up with, underneath the square root, you're going to end up with 33. Okay, so I'm going to recopy what I have so far. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 33 divided by, now if I simplify here, 2 times 2 equals 4. Okay. So right now, I can't get any more precise than this without using a calculator. So for the sake of this class, I'm going to let you leave 33 there. Let's say this was a perfect square. In that case, you could simplify it further. So we'll do an example like that in just a moment, where you can simplify it a little bit further. But for the time being, let's just look at that. So what this means is we would have two solutions. We would have negative 1 plus square root of 33. And when I do square root of 33 in my calculator, it comes out to be 5.7. So it's about 6. So it would kind of be like saying negative 1 plus 6 divided by 4, and negative 1 minus 6 divided by 4. Okay, and you could simplify negative 1 plus 6 to get 5 over 4. And you could do a keep, change, change here to get a negative 7 over 4. Again, these are estimates. I wouldn't even do this for your homework. I would just leave it as square root of 33. But just to give you an idea of what this sign plus or minus means. Okay? We're going to go ahead and do another example. This next example is going to be a little different. My marker's not erasing super well today. Okay, the next example I'm going to give you is 3x squared plus 4 equals 13x. So this one's a little bit different, as we don't have it set equal to 0. However, we are capable of setting this equal to 0, right? We know our basic algebra. So what we can do is we can move this 13x here to the other side. If you remember, by taking the opposite of 13, negative 13x, we can move the 13 to the other side. Okay. So we did the same thing to each side. This side cancels out and is left with a 0. And over on the left-hand side, we have 3x squared minus 13x plus 4. Okay, from this point on, we can figure out what the A, B, and C are. So I'm going to give you just a second right now to do that before I move on with everyone together. So see if you can figure out what the A, B, and C values are here. So you probably found that your A is your 3. Your negative 13 is your B. And your positive 4 is your C. So now we're going to move on and we're going to use the quadratic equation. So we're going to use the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2 times a. And that's equal to x. Okay. So we just said that our a is equal to 3, and our b is equal to negative 13, and our c is equal to positive 4. So let's go ahead and substitute these values in. The opposite of negative 13 is positive 13. Opposite of b, so opposite of negative 13 is positive 13, plus or minus the square root of b. So we're going to take b as it is, so that's going to be negative 13, and we're going to square that, minus 4 times 3 times 4. All divided by 2 times a, so 2 times 3. Okay, we're going to go ahead and simplify that a little bit further. So let's start by simplifying under the square root. And simplifying under the square root, I'm going to recopy it onto the new board. So when I'm doing this, I'm going to start by my negative 13 squared. So negative 13 times negative 13 is going to give us a positive number. And when I do that out, I get 169. And then here, I'm going to have a negative 4 or minus 4. So I'm going to multiply these three numbers together. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 4 is 48. And I only have one negative, so it's going to stay a subtraction there. And I'm going to divide that all by 6. Okay. Continuing under the square root now, to simplify a little bit further, if I have 169 minus 48, that's going to give me 121. And hopefully you know what the square root of 121 is. I will only expect you to know square roots up through the square root that equals 12. But square root of 121 gives me 11. So what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at 13 plus or minus 11 divided by 6. So we're going to continue at that point. We're going to look at it as 13 plus 11 divided by 6, and then 13 minus 11 divided by 6. So let's do that now. If you're feeling good about it, you can try on your own. So if I have 13 plus or minus 11 divided by 6. So I'm going to start with 13 plus 11 divided by 6. And then I'll do 13 minus 11 divided by 6. So 13 plus 11 gives me 24 divided by 6, which equals 4. Yeah. Because 24 divided by 6 is 4. Then I can also have, so 4 is one of my answers. The other one is going to be 13 minus 11, because I'm going to take the minus divided by 6. So 13 minus 11 is 2 divided by 6. If I simplify this fraction, I get 1/3. So what this means is if I were to graph this, my x-intercepts, so I could answer it this x equals 1/3 and 4 as my answers. Okay, so this means that if I were to look at a graph, my x-intercepts are going to be 1/3, so somewhere around here, and 4. So it means that there's a parabola that intersects here and goes somewhere down here. Now later on you'll learn how you can actually graph this, but right now we're just interested in these 2 points. Okay, so you'll get some more practice of this in class the next few days. So go ahead and do the online homework to practice, do your best, and I'll see you in class. Bye.